Welcome to Crime Cipher, your gateway into the shadows where truth hides and justice waits. Each week, we unravel a new mystery, a tale of deception, courage, and dark secrets that challenge the very fabric of society, from cold cases to high-stakes conspiracies. We bring you stories that captivate, educate, and empower. Subscribe and ring the bell to join our community of truth seekers. Dive deep with Crime Cipher, where every crime tells a story and every story reveals a cipher. Let's move to our first story. And this one begins with a pediatrician whose patient files contained names of children who never existed. The quiet suburb of Brookfield, Wisconsin, had always seemed untouchable by evil. Soccer moms carpooled in minivans. Fathers coached Little League on weekends, and the local coffee shop knew everyone's usual order. But on October 15th, 2023, this picture-perfect American dream shattered into 1,000 pieces. The discovery of a young woman's body would expose a monster hiding behind the most trusted profession in society. This isn't just another true crime story. This is about how we learned that sometimes the people we trust most with our lives are the ones we should fear the most. Dr. Elaine was everything a small Wisconsin town could ask for in a pediatrician. At 34, she had built a practice that parents drove hours to reach, drawn by her gentle manner with frightened children and her ability to calm worried mothers with just a few words. Her medical degree from Northwestern University hung proudly in her office, surrounded by colorful drawings from grateful young patients. Born in Milwaukee to middle-class parents, Elaine's path to medicine wasn't born from privilege, but from pain. Her father, Robert, worked double shifts at the brewery and came home angry more often than not. Her mother, Linda, retreated into prescription pills and afternoon wine, leaving young Elaine to raise herself. The bruises were always explained away. Clumsy falls, sporting accidents, childhood mishaps. Medicine became her escape. While other teenagers were at parties, Elaine buried herself in biology textbooks. While her classmates dated and experimented, she volunteered at the local hospital, finding peace in the sterile corridors where suffering had names and solutions. The chaos of her home life had taught her to compartmentalize pain, to function normally while internal storms raged. In medical school, she met David, a fellow student studying to become a surgeon. Their relationship was built on shared late-night study sessions and the mutual understanding that work came first, always. They married in a simple ceremony after residency, settling in Brookfield where Elaine opened her practice and David joined the local hospital's surgical team. To their neighbors, the couple was perfect, successful, attractive, childless by choice, so they could focus on healing other people's children. David worked long hours in the OR, often sleeping at the hospital during busy periods. This gave Elaine freedom that would prove deadly. What nobody knew was that Elaine's childhood trauma had created something dark inside her. The powerlessness she felt as a child had evolved into a need for complete control. The same gentle hands that soothed crying babies had learned to inflict pain without leaving evidence. Her medical knowledge, meant to heal, had become a weapon. The insomnia that plagued her since childhood grew worse over the years. She would drive through empty streets at 3 a.m., watching houses full of sleeping families, feeling both envious and contemptuous of their peace. She began to fantasize about having complete power over another person's life and death, the ultimate control she'd never had as a helpless child. Amanda was 23 and full of dreams. A graduate student at the University of Wisconsin studying social work, she spent her days learning how to help troubled children, ironically the same population Dr. Elaine served. Amanda came from a loving family, spoke 3 languages, and volunteered at the women's shelter on weekends. She was everything Elaine had never been allowed to be. Happy, supported, free. Their paths crossed on September 24th, 2023, when Amanda brought her 7-year-old nephew to Dr. Elaine for a routine checkup. During the visit, Elaine learned that Amanda was writing her thesis on childhood trauma and its long-term effects. Something about the young woman's confidence, her easy smile, her obvious emotional health, triggered something predatory in Elaine. Over the following weeks, Elaine began what she would later call research. Using her medical credentials and the trust they afforded, she started showing up in places where Amanda spent time: the university library, the coffee shop near campus, the women's shelter. She posed as a concerned community member interested in Amanda's work, gradually building what appeared to be a mentorship relationship. Amanda, eager to learn from a successful professional, welcomed Dr. Elaine's attention. When Elaine suggested they meet privately to discuss Amanda's thesis, the young woman was flattered. The meeting was scheduled for October 13th at Elaine's home office after regular patient hours. What happened in that office would haunt investigators for months. Using her medical knowledge, Elaine administered a carefully calculated dose of sedatives through what Amanda believed was a vitamin injection. Something Elaine claimed would help with Amanda's reported stress and poor sleep. As Amanda lost consciousness, she realized too late that she had walked into a trap. For 48 hours, Amanda was held captive in a soundproofed room Elaine had constructed in her basement. The space was clinical, sterile, designed like a medical examination room, but equipped with restraints and monitoring equipment. Elaine documented everything with the same meticulous attention she gave her medical files. Amanda's vitals, her responses to different stimuli, her psychological state as hope faded to terror. Using techniques learned in medical school but perverted beyond recognition, Elaine conducted what she called experiments in human endurance and psychological breaking points. She kept Amanda alive and conscious through most of it, using IV drips and medical interventions to prevent shock or death. The young woman's pleas for release were met with clinical observation and note-taking. The end came on October 15th when Amanda finally stopped responding to Elaine's psychological manipulations. Whether from physical trauma, psychological break, or simply the will to deny her captor any more satisfaction, Amanda slipped away during the early morning hours. Elaine later admitted she felt both disappointed that her subject was gone and relieved that the compulsion that had driven her to this point was temporarily satisfied. Body disposal became another clinical exercise. Using her knowledge of decomposition and forensic investigation, gained from years of consulting with law enforcement on child abuse cases, Elaine transported Amanda's body to Peninsula State Park under cover of darkness. She chose a location where natural wildlife activity would compromise evidence, and where the body would be found quickly enough to prevent complete decomposition, but not so quickly as to preserve all forensic evidence. What Elaine hadn't counted on was her own psychological unraveling. The control and power she'd sought began to consume her. She started making mistakes, keeping trophies from the crime scene, returning to the dump site repeatedly, and most fatally, she began researching her next victim too openly. The same meticulous nature that had made her an excellent doctor would ultimately lead to her downfall. as investigators would discover a paper trail of obsessive planning that stretched back months. The investigation began when hikers discovered Amanda's body on October 16th, just 24 hours after her death. The condition of the remains immediately told investigators this wasn't a random attack. The body showed signs of medical intervention, professional restraint techniques, and careful staging that suggested either medical knowledge or extensive planning. Detective Maria, a veteran of the Wisconsin State Criminal Investigation Division, took lead on the case. Maria had seen enough violent crime to recognize the hallmarks of an organized, intelligent perpetrator. The absence of sexual assault and the clinical nature of the victim's injuries suggested someone with medical training. The breakthrough came when investigators traced Amanda's final weeks. Security footage from the university library showed her having extended conversations with a woman who matched Dr. Elaine's description. Phone records revealed multiple calls between Amanda and the doctor's office, far more than would be normal for treating her nephew. When detectives interviewed Elaine on October 25th, she appeared cooperative and concerned, exactly what they'd expect from an upstanding community member. However, inconsistencies in her story began to emerge. She claimed to barely know Amanda, yet phone logs showed lengthy conversations. She said she'd been home alone the night Amanda disappeared, but her car's GPS told a different story. The investigation intensified when a search warrant revealed Elaine's basement office. The soundproofing, medical equipment, and restraint systems were impossible to explain as legitimate medical tools. Most damning was a journal Elaine had kept, documenting her research in clinical detail that would make seasoned investigators sick. David, genuinely shocked by the discoveries, cooperated fully with police. He admitted to investigators that he'd been largely absent from their home life, working excessive hours to avoid dealing with what he now realized were Elaine's escalating psychological problems. He'd attributed her odd behavior to work stress and their inability to have children, never imagining the dark truth. Under interrogation, faced with overwhelming evidence, Elaine's carefully constructed facade cracked. She confessed not only to Amanda's murder, but revealed plans for future victims. 3 other young women she'd been studying with the same methodical approach she'd used on Amanda. On March 15, 2024, Dr. Elaine was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that her abuse of the trust placed in medical professionals made her crimes particularly heinous. Brookfield's pediatric practice closed permanently, leaving families to drive to neighboring towns and struggle with the knowledge that they'd trusted their children's lives to a predator. The case sent shockwaves through Wisconsin's medical community and sparked national conversations about psychological screening for healthcare providers. Amanda's family established a foundation focused on improving safety protocols for students conducting field research. Dr. Elaine represents every parent's worst nightmare: evil hiding behind credentials, compassion masquerading as predation. Her case reminds us that monsters don't always lurk in dark alleys. Sometimes they wear white coats and have medical degrees hanging on their walls. As investigators continue to review cold cases for potential connections to Dr. Elaine, one thing remains certain. In a world where we must trust strangers with our most precious possessions, our children, vigilance is not paranoia, it's survival. What other trusted professionals might be hiding dark secrets? Subscribe to Crime Ciphers for more shocking true crime stories that expose the predators hiding in plain sight. Hit that notification bell. Because in the world of crime, knowledge is your best protection. Let's move to our second story. And this kicks off with a nurse who discovered forbidden files in a hospital basement. In the heart of Houston, Texas, where oil refineries meet medical complexes and urban sprawl stretches toward endless horizons, Mercy General Hospital stood as a beacon of healing in the nation's fourth-largest city. With its gleaming towers and state-of-the-art equipment, it represented everything Americans trusted about their healthcare system. But behind those sterile walls, a darkness festered that would challenge everything the community believed about the people sworn to, first, do no harm. Lila was 29 years old when she first noticed something was wrong. A registered nurse with 5 years of experience in critical care, she had built a reputation as someone who noticed details others missed and cared about patients others forgot. Her colleagues respected her clinical skills, and her patients trusted her gentle bedside manner. But it was precisely these qualities, her attention to detail and her unwavering compassion, that would lead her into the most dangerous investigation of her life. Born into a working-class family in Houston's East End, Lila had learned early that life wasn't fair, but that didn't mean you stopped fighting. Her father abandoned the family when she was 12, leaving her mother Molly to raise 3 children on a grocery store clerk's salary. Lila watched Molly work double shifts, sacrifice her own dreams, and never complain. It was this example of quiet strength that drove Lila to pursue nursing, a career where she could protect people when they were most vulnerable. At Mercy General, Lila quickly distinguished herself in the cardiac intensive care unit. She was the nurse who stayed late to comfort frightened family members, who noticed when elderly patients weren't receiving their pain medication on time, and who questioned doctors when something didn't seem right. Her supervisor, Stevie, often praised her advocacy for patients, telling colleagues that Lila had the kind of moral compass that made nursing a calling rather than just a job. But in the spring of 2023, Lila began noticing patterns that troubled her deeply. Patients in the hospital's long-term care wing were disappearing from their rooms during night shifts, only to return hours later disoriented and frightened. When she asked about these absences, she was told the patients had been taken for routine procedures or therapeutic activities. But the explanations never quite made sense. Why were these procedures happening at 2 a.m.? Why weren't they documented in the medical charts? And why did the patients seem so traumatized afterward? The first real evidence came when Lila was working a double shift in October 2023. Around midnight, she saw 2 orderlies wheeling an elderly woman toward the service elevator, the one that led to the basement levels usually reserved for storage and maintenance. The woman was conscious but restrained, her eyes wide with terror. When Lila approached to check on the patient, one of the orderlies, Blake, told her curtly that she was needed elsewhere and to mind her own business. Unable to shake the image of the frightened woman, Lila began paying closer attention to the night shift activities. She started keeping informal notes about patients who went missing during her shifts and noticed a disturbing pattern. The victims were almost always elderly patients with dementia, homeless individuals with no family to ask questions, or psychiatric patients from the hospital's mental health ward. They were people society had forgotten, people whose disappearances wouldn't be noticed or investigated. Her breakthrough came in December, when she volunteered to work Christmas Eve, knowing the skeleton staff would make it easier to investigate. Following the service elevator to the basement, Lila discovered a wing of the hospital that didn't appear on any official floor plan. Behind doors marked "Authorized Personnel Only" and "Storage," she found a series of rooms that looked nothing like medical storage facilities. The first room contained video monitoring equipment and filing cabinets, filled with detailed observations of patient behavior under various experimental conditions. The second room was set up like a medical examination room, but equipped with restraints and instruments that had no legitimate medical purpose. The third room was the most horrifying. It contained several hospital beds, each equipped with IV lines, monitoring equipment, and leather restraints worn smooth from use. The files Lila discovered told a story of systematic abuse that had been going on for over 2 years. Vulnerable patients were being subjected to unauthorized pharmaceutical trials, psychological experiments designed to test pain tolerance and fear responses, and procedures that violated every medical ethics standard ever written. The documentation was meticulous, suggesting that whoever was running this operation saw it as legitimate research rather than torture. Detective Leon of the Houston Police Department's Healthcare Fraud Unit was initially skeptical when Lila contacted him through a mutual friend. Healthcare workers occasionally reported suspicious activities that turned out to be misunderstandings or personality conflicts. But when Lila showed him photographs of the basement facility and copies of the experimental logs she had smuggled out, Leon realized they were dealing with something unprecedented. The investigation that followed was one of the most complex medical crime cases in Texas history. Leon worked with FBI agents specializing in healthcare fraud and medical ethics violations, while Lila continued working at the hospital, carefully documenting activities and identifying victims. The danger was constant. Several of Lila's attempts to gather evidence nearly exposed her, and she received anonymous threats warning her to stop asking questions. The scope of the conspiracy shocked even experienced investigators. The illegal experiments were being conducted by a group of doctors and researchers who had convinced themselves they were advancing medical science by testing treatments on patients who wouldn't miss a few hours or couldn't comprehend what was happening anyway. They justified their actions by claiming that homeless patients and dementia sufferers were contributing to medical progress instead of being drains on the healthcare system. The ringleader was Dr. Dean, a researcher who had been denied approval for human trials by legitimate medical boards and decided to conduct them anyway, using patients who couldn't consent or complain. Dean had recruited several other medical professionals, including Dr. Evan and Nurse Tanya, by convincing them that current medical ethics standards were too restrictive and that breakthrough treatments required more aggressive research methods. The evidence collected by Lila and Detective Leon revealed that over 200 patients had been subjected to unauthorized procedures over a 2-year period. Many suffered lasting psychological trauma from their experiences. Some had been given experimental drugs that caused permanent side effects. At least 12 patients had died during or shortly after the illegal procedures, though their deaths had been attributed to their underlying conditions rather than the unauthorized treatments. The arrests began in February 2024, with Dr. Dean and 6 other medical professionals charged with assault, unlawful human experimentation, and murder. The hospital's administration faced charges for failing to maintain proper oversight and for creating conditions that allowed the abuse to continue. The scandal made national headlines, with Lila's courage in exposing the crimes earning her recognition as a whistleblower who risked her career to protect vulnerable patients. The trial lasted 8 months, with Lila serving as the prosecution's key witness. Defense attorneys attempted to portray her as a disgruntled employee seeking attention, but the physical evidence she had gathered and the testimony of surviving victims made the case ironclad. Dr. Dean was sentenced to life in prison without parole, while his accomplices, Dr. Evan and Nurse Tanya, received sentences ranging from 20 to 45 years. Blake, who had been working as muscle for the operation, received 15 years for his role in the conspiracy. The Mercy General scandal led to sweeping changes in hospital oversight procedures across Texas and eventually nationwide. New regulations required independent monitoring of all research activities, mandatory reporting systems for suspected abuse, and protection for healthcare workers who report suspicious activities. Lila's advocacy also led to the creation of patient advocacy positions at major hospitals, ensuring that vulnerable patients have dedicated defenders. Today, Lila continues working as a nurse, though she has moved to a different hospital and focuses on training other healthcare workers to recognize signs of patient abuse. She speaks regularly at medical ethics conferences and has become a national advocate for patient rights. Her mother, Molly, often accompanies her to speaking engagements, proud of the daughter who refused to stay silent in the face of evil. Stevie, her former supervisor, now works with Lila to implement the new oversight protocols that emerged from the scandal. The basement wing at Mercy General has been permanently sealed, but a memorial plaque in the hospital lobby honors the victims of the illegal experiments and reminds visitors that healthcare workers have a duty to protect, not exploit, the vulnerable. Lila's story serves as a powerful reminder that evil can flourish in places we trust most, hidden behind professional credentials and institutional authority. Her courage in challenging a system that prioritized research over basic human dignity saved countless lives and changed how America protects its most vulnerable patients. The patients who suffered in those basement rooms will never fully recover from their trauma, but they can take comfort in knowing that their pain was not meaningless. It led to protections that will safeguard future generations of vulnerable patients from those who would exploit their trust. What other trusted institutions might be hiding dark secrets behind their professional facades? Subscribe to Crime Ciphers for more shocking true crime stories that expose the predators hiding in plain sight. Hit that notification bell, because in a world where evil can wear scrubs and carry stethoscopes, vigilance is everyone's responsibility. Let's move to our third story. And this unfolds around a senator whose campaign promises concealed deadly betrayals. In the imposing shadow of the United States Capitol, where democracy's heartbeat echoes through marble corridors and beneath soaring domes, Senator Alora stood as a beacon of hope for millions of Americans. At 42, she was the youngest woman ever elected to represent Ohio, her rise meteoric and her reputation spotless. She championed veterans' rights, fought for government transparency, and delivered speeches that stirred souls and inspired trust. But in the labyrinthine world of Washington politics, where power corrupts and money talks louder than conscience, Alora's pristine image was about to crumble under the weight of her own choices. Born in the Rust Belt city of Akron, Ohio, Alora grew up watching her father struggle to find work after the local steel mill closed. Her mother, Vera, cleaned office buildings at night to keep food on the table, and young Alora learned early that the system often failed those who needed it most. These experiences forged her determination to serve others, to be the voice for the voiceless in the halls of power. She excelled academically, earning a full scholarship to Harvard Law School, where she graduated summa cum laude and immediately threw herself into public service. Her political career began in the Ohio State Legislature, where she quickly gained attention for her ability to reach across party lines and get things done. When Ohio's longtime senator announced his retirement, Alora seized the opportunity, running on a platform of government accountability and military reform. Her victory was decisive, and her arrival in Washington was heralded as the dawn of a new generation of principled leadership. But Washington had a way of testing even the most principled souls. Within months of taking office, Alora found herself courted by defense contractors, eager to influence her votes on military spending bills. At first, she resisted their overtures, staying true to her campaign promises of transparency and fiscal responsibility. But the pressure was relentless, and the money was substantial. Campaign contributions flowed into her war chest from companies like Titan Defense Systems and Arsenal Industries, firms that stood to gain billions from the military contracts she would vote on. The transformation was gradual, but inexorable. Alora began attending private dinners with defense executives, accepting speaking fees that dwarfed her government salary, and slowly aligning her votes with the interests of her new financial backers. She justified it to herself as necessary for re-election, telling herself that she couldn't serve the people of Ohio if she wasn't in office. But with each compromise, each rationalization, she descended deeper into a web of corruption that would ultimately cost lives. The first person to notice something was wrong was Celine, an investigative journalist for the Columbus Dispatch who had been following Alora's career since her state legislature days. Celine had always admired the senator's integrity, which made the inconsistencies in her recent voting record all the more troubling. When Alora voted to approve a massive defense spending bill that included contracts for weapons systems the Pentagon hadn't even requested, Celine began digging deeper. What she found was a pattern of campaign contributions followed by favorable votes, a quid pro quo arrangement that violated both federal law and the public trust. But Celine needed more than suspicious timing to prove corruption. She needed evidence, and that's where Amari came in. Amari was a former project manager for Titan Defense Systems, who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with his company's business practices. He had watched as Titan deliberately overcharged the government for weapons that didn't work as advertised, knowing that soldiers' lives depended on equipment that might fail them in combat. When Amari tried to report these problems through official channels, he was ignored, then threatened, then finally fired for being a troublemaker. Determined to expose the truth, Amari approached the FBI with a cache of documents that revealed the scope of the corruption, purchase orders for weapons that existed only on paper, test results that had been falsified, and most damning of all, recorded conversations between Titan executives discussing which senators could be bought and how much it would cost. FBI Special Agent Chase had spent 15 years investigating public corruption cases. But the evidence Amari presented was among the most comprehensive he had ever seen. The recordings alone were enough to bring down several high-ranking officials. But Chase knew that prosecuting a sitting senator would require building an ironclad case. He reached out to Celine, knowing that media pressure would be essential to preventing the case from being buried by political influence. Working together, the trio began mapping out a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. They discovered that Alora was just one of several senators receiving money from defense contractors in exchange for their votes. The contractors, in turn, were supplying weapons to foreign governments embroiled in civil wars, conflicts that were prolonged and intensified by the steady flow of American-made arms. The human cost was staggering. Villages destroyed by artillery shells manufactured in Ohio factories. Children killed by landmines designed in American boardrooms. Refugee camps swelling with families displaced by wars fueled by American weapons sold with American political approval. The very people Alora had sworn to protect were dying because of the choices she had made in the name of political expediency. As Celine, Amari, and Chase gathered evidence, they found themselves under surveillance. Anonymous threats appeared in their mailboxes. Celine's editor, Amy, at the Columbus Dispatch received calls from powerful advertisers threatening to pull their business if she continued her investigation. Amari's apartment was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen, a clear message that he was being watched. But the trio pressed on, driven by a shared conviction that the truth had to be told regardless of the personal cost. They worked in secret, meeting in coffee shops and parking garages like characters in a spy novel, passing information through encrypted channels and hidden drives. Their investigation revealed not just corruption, but a systematic betrayal of American values by those entrusted to uphold them. The breakthrough came when Chase obtained a warrant to search Alora's campaign office. Hidden in a safe behind a false wall, investigators found a ledger detailing payments from defense contractors tied to specific votes. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Alora had sold her vote to the highest bidder, and American soldiers and foreign civilians had paid the ultimate price. When the Washington Post published Celine's expose in January 2024, the reaction was swift and devastating. The headline read, "Senator for Sale: How Defense Contractors Bought Ohio's Alora," and the story detailed 2 years of corruption that had cost American taxpayers billions and foreign civilians their lives. Within hours, calls for Alora's resignation echoed across Capitol Hill. And within days, the FBI was executing search warrants at her homes in Washington and Ohio. The subsequent congressional hearings were a spectacle of American democracy at work. Alora appeared before the Senate Ethics Committee, her once confident demeanor replaced by the hollow-eyed look of someone whose world had collapsed. She denied the charges initially, claiming the payments were legitimate campaign contributions and that her votes reflected her genuine beliefs about national security. But the evidence was too overwhelming, the paper trail too clear. Video footage showed Alora meeting with defense executives Rhett, Max, and Charlie just days before crucial votes. Bank records traced money from contractor accounts through shell companies to her campaign coffers. Most damning of all were the recorded phone conversations in which Alora explicitly discussed trading votes for money, her voice betraying none of the moral anguish one might expect from someone compromising their principles. On March 15, 2024, facing certain expulsion from the Senate and federal criminal charges, Alora resigned in disgrace. In her resignation letter, she claimed to be stepping down to spare my family and the great state of Ohio further embarrassment. But she accepted no responsibility for the lives lost because of her actions. The criminal trial that followed was a media sensation. Alora was charged with conspiracy, bribery, and racketeering under the RICO Act. The prosecution, led by federal prosecutors Felix and Kingston, painted a picture of a criminal enterprise masquerading as a Senate office. Alora's defense team argued that she had been naive rather than criminal, manipulated by sophisticated operators who had exploited her inexperience. But the jury saw through the excuse, and after just 6 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Alora was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.2 million in restitution. Her co-conspirators Rhett, Max, and Charlie at the defense contractors received similar sentences, and the companies themselves paid hundreds of millions in fines and civil penalties. But perhaps more importantly, the scandal led to sweeping reforms in campaign finance law and congressional ethics rules. The Alora case became a watershed moment in American politics, proof that no one, not even a United States senator, was above the law. Celine won a Pulitzer Prize for her reporting and went on to establish a non-profit organization dedicated to investigating government corruption, Amari became a prominent advocate for whistleblower protections and helped establish new safeguards to prevent defense contractors from selling defective equipment to the military. Chase was promoted to head the FBI's Public Corruption Unit and has since overseen investigations that have led to the convictions of dozens of corrupt officials. He often speaks at law enforcement conferences about the Allora case, using it as an example of how patient, methodical investigation can overcome even the most powerful conspiracies. Today, Allora sits in a minimum security federal prison in West Virginia, her political career destroyed and her legacy forever tarnished. The woman who once dreamed of fighting for the forgotten and downtrodden became a cautionary tale about how power corrupts even the most well-intentioned public servants. Her fall from grace serves as a reminder that in a democracy, eternal vigilance is the price of freedom, and that the greatest threats to our republic often come from within. The empty Senate seat that Allora once occupied is now filled by a former prosecutor who ran on a platform of government accountability and transparency. Every time she takes the Senate floor, she carries with her the lesson of Allora, that public service is a sacred trust, and those who betray that trust will ultimately face justice. Let's move to our fourth story. And it begins with a typed manuscript that would expose decades of buried secrets. In the quiet college town of Maplewood, Ohio, autumn had painted the university campus in brilliant shades of gold and crimson. Students hurried between ivy-covered brick buildings, their breath visible in the crisp morning air as they pursued their dreams of higher education. Among the faculty was Professor Elise, a woman whose reputation for rigorous investigative journalism had attracted students from across the country. Her office, tucked away in the journalism building's third floor, was a sanctuary of truth-seeking. Walls lined with photographs of legendary reporters and shelves groaning under the weight of books about corruption, cover-ups, and the price of speaking truth to power. Elise had spent 15 years as a reporter for major newspapers before transitioning to academia. Driven by a desire to shape the next generation of journalists who would carry the torch of accountability, she believed deeply that in a democracy, an informed citizenry was the greatest defense against tyranny, and that journalists served as the guardians of that information. Her students knew her as demanding but fair, someone who pushed them to dig deeper, question more persistently, and never accept easy answers when complex truths lay beneath the surface. On a gray October afternoon, as rain drummed against her office windows, Elise discovered an unmarked manila envelope tucked beneath a stack of student papers on her desk. Inside was a carefully typewritten manuscript titled Shadows of Silence. The paper was old, but well preserved. And as Elise began to read, she realized she was holding something extraordinary. A detailed account of corruption, murder, and cover-up that reached into the highest levels of the university she served. The manuscript told the story of Kevin, a charismatic student activist who had vanished without a trace in the autumn of 1990. According to the anonymous author, Kevin had been investigating a complex web of financial impropriety involving university officials, local politicians, and wealthy landowners who had been illegally acquiring public land through fraudulent deals. The manuscript suggested that Kevin's disappearance was no accident, but rather the result of a conspiracy that had silenced him permanently to protect millions of dollars in illegal transactions. Intrigued and disturbed by what she had read, Elise decided to investigate the claims. She enlisted the help of two of her most promising graduate students. Noah, a meticulous researcher with an encyclopedic knowledge of public records and archival systems, and Finn, a tech-savvy investigator who specialized in digital forensics and data recovery. Together, they began what would become the most dangerous and important investigation of their lives. Their initial research took them deep into the university's archives, where they discovered that many records from the 1990 to 1991 academic year were mysteriously missing. Student newspaper issues that should have covered Kevin's disappearance were absent from the bound volumes. Police reports that should have documented the investigation into his vanishing had been either heavily redacted or removed entirely. It was as if someone had systematically erased Kevin from the historical record. Noah's persistence paid off when she discovered a cache of documents in the basement of the university library. Boxes of materials that had been misfiled and forgotten. Among them were copies of flyers Kevin had distributed, detailing his research into the land deals. The documents were explosive, showing clear evidence of bid rigging, environmental law violations, and the systematic bribery of local officials. More importantly, they contained a list of names, professors, administrators, and business leaders who had been involved in the scheme. As word of their investigation began to spread, the team found themselves under increasing surveillance. Elise's phone began receiving anonymous calls in the middle of the night. Finn's computer was hacked repeatedly, forcing him to work from increasingly secure systems. Noah discovered that someone had been following her home from the library, and her apartment was broken into twice, though nothing appeared to be stolen. Recognizing that they needed help from outside the university system, Elise reached out to Elena, an investigative journalist from the Columbus Dispatch who had built a reputation for exposing political corruption. Elena agreed to collaborate, bringing with her resources and connections that would prove crucial to the investigation's success. She also introduced them to Maisie, a federal prosecutor who specialized in RICO cases and had successfully prosecuted numerous corruption rings. The investigation took a dramatic turn when Finn managed to recover deleted emails from a university server that had been scheduled for replacement. The emails, dating back to the early 1990s, showed clear coordination between university officials and local law enforcement to suppress information about Kevin's disappearance. Most shocking of all was a series of exchanges involving a mysterious figure known only as Tatum, someone who appeared to coordinate the cover-up and who had continued to exert influence over university affairs for decades. Working with Maisie, the team developed a strategy to safely expose their findings without putting themselves in further danger. They carefully documented every piece of evidence, created multiple backup copies, and established secure communication channels. Elena began reaching out to national media outlets, building interest in a story that would soon captivate the entire country. The breakthrough came when Noah discovered that Tatum was not a code name, but a real person, Tatum Whitmore, a man who had served in various capacities at the university for over 30 years and who currently held a position on the board of trustees. More importantly, she found evidence that Tatum had been present on campus the night Kevin disappeared, despite his later claims that he had been out of town on university business. As their investigation reached its climax, the team received a chilling message. Kevin's remains had been found in a construction site where a new dormitory was being built. The discovery vindicated their work, but also confirmed their worst fears. Kevin had been murdered, and his body had been hidden for over 30 years. The national media explosion that followed was unprecedented. Elena's initial story in the Columbus Dispatch was picked up by CNN, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. The FBI opened a federal investigation into the university's affairs, and a grand jury was convened to examine the evidence of conspiracy and murder. Tatum Whitmore was arrested at his home in a dramatic dawn raid that was broadcast live on national television. The subsequent trials revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Kevin had indeed been murdered to prevent him from exposing the land fraud scheme, which had ultimately netted its participants over $50 million in illegal profits. Tatum and 6 other defendants, including corrupt officials Andres and Lilith, were convicted of various federal crimes, including murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. The university was forced to pay over $100 million in fines and restitution. But perhaps more importantly, the case led to fundamental changes in how universities handle student safety and transparency. New federal regulations were implemented, requiring institutions of higher education to maintain comprehensive records and to report suspicious disappearances to federal authorities. Kevin's name was memorialized in a scholarship fund that supports student journalists investigating corruption and misconduct. Elise returned to her teaching, but her experience had changed her profoundly. Her classes now included case studies drawn from her own investigation, and she made sure every student understood that journalism was not just a career, but a sacred trust. Noah and Finn graduated and went on to establish a nonprofit organization that assists student journalists in conducting difficult investigations, providing them with the resources and security measures they need to pursue dangerous truths. The identity of the manuscript's author was never definitively established, though many suspected it was someone who had been close to Kevin and had spent decades waiting for the right moment to see justice served. Whoever they were, their courage in breaking their silence after 30 years had saved countless future victims and proved that truth, no matter how deeply buried, will eventually find its way to the light. The empty dormitory room where Kevin had once lived was converted into a memorial study space, where his photograph hangs alongside those of other journalists who gave their lives in pursuit of truth. Engraved beneath his picture are the words he had written in his final letter home. "The truth is not always comfortable, but it is always necessary." Today, Maplewood University stands as a symbol of institutional transformation and redemption. The corruption that once festered in its halls has been exposed and excised, replaced by transparency, accountability, and a renewed commitment to protecting those brave enough to speak truth to power. Kevin's voice, silenced for 3 decades, now echoes in the work of every student journalist who refuses to accept easy answers and demands justice for the forgotten and the vulnerable. Let's move to our 5th story. And this one begins with a server room where digital evidence was vanishing faster than smoke. In the heart of Silicon Valley, where innovation danced with ambition beneath towering glass monuments to technological progress, Infranet Corporation commanded the digital landscape like a benevolent giant. Its sprawling campus in Cupertino housed some of the brightest minds in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and data management. But within these gleaming walls, where billions of data packets zipped through fiber optic cables every second, a conspiracy was brewing that would shake the very foundations of trust in the digital age. Paisley was one of Infranet's most promising cybersecurity engineers, a young prodigy whose passion for digital protection had earned recognition throughout the industry. At 29, she had already developed encryption protocols that secured communications for millions of users worldwide. Her colleagues respected her meticulous attention to detail, and her superiors valued her ability to spot vulnerabilities others missed. But nothing in her experience had prepared her for what she would discover on a rain-soaked October evening, when the rest of the building had emptied and only the hum of servers kept her company. Working late to complete a routine security audit, Paisley noticed something that made her blood run cold. System logs showed massive data deletions occurring in synchronized patterns, far too organized to be accidental. Encrypted files were being systematically purged, and most disturbing of all, references to something called Project Umbra appeared and disappeared from the servers like digital ghosts. The deletions weren't random. They were methodical, purposeful, and clearly designed to eliminate evidence of something significant. This isn't a glitch, Paisley confided to her colleague Alice the next morning. Alice was a brilliant cybersecurity analyst whose analytical mind and ethical compass had made her one of the most trusted voices on their team. Together, they began a dangerous investigation that would ultimately expose one of the most sophisticated corporate conspiracies in American history. Working through nights and weekends, using their privileged access to dig deeper into infranet systems, they began to piece together fragments of a terrifying truth. Project Umbra was not a defensive cybersecurity initiative as they had initially hoped. Instead, it was a covert program designed to manipulate artificial intelligence systems that controlled everything from autonomous vehicles to critical healthcare devices. The sabotage was subtle but deadly. Algorithms were being modified to cause critical failures at precisely calculated moments, creating what appeared to be random accidents but were actually orchestrated murders. The scope of the conspiracy was breathtaking. Autonomous vehicles were being programmed to experience steering failures at high speeds. Pacemakers and insulin pumps were being configured to malfunction during critical moments. Hospital ventilators were set to deliver incorrect oxygen levels during surgical procedures. Each accident appeared isolated, random, tragic, but explainable. But taken together, they formed a pattern of technological genocide designed to enrich a shadowy network of conspirators who profited from insurance claims, stock market manipulation, and the elimination of specific individuals who posed threats to their interests. Recognizing they were in over their heads, Paisley and Alice reached out to Ruby, an investigative journalist whose reputation for exposing corporate malfeasance had made her both famous and feared throughout Silicon Valley. Ruby had built her career on following paper trails that led to the highest levels of corporate power, and the evidence that Paisley and Alice presented to her was more explosive than anything she had encountered in 15 years of journalism. Understanding that they would need legal muscle to take on a corporation as powerful as Infranet, Ruby connected them with Joel, a federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar crime and had successfully prosecuted some of the most complex fraud cases in recent memory. Joel's reputation for relentless pursuit of justice had made him a nightmare for corporate criminals, and he immediately recognized the potential scope of the crimes they were investigating. To build an ironclad case, Joel enlisted the expertise of Abel, a digital forensics specialist whose ability to recover deleted data and trace digital footprints was legendary among law enforcement agencies. Abel had cut his teeth on cybercrime cases involving international hacking rings, and his technical skills would prove crucial in reconstructing the evidence that Infranet's conspirators thought they had permanently erased. As their investigation deepened, the danger escalated dramatically. Paisley's apartment was broken into twice, though nothing was stolen. A clear message that she was being watched. Alice discovered surveillance equipment hidden in her car, and her personal devices were repeatedly hacked despite her cybersecurity expertise. Ruby received anonymous threats warning her to abandon the story, and her editor was contacted by advertisers threatening to pull millions of dollars in revenue if the investigation continued. But the team pressed forward, driven by the knowledge that every day they delayed meant more potential victims. Abel's forensic work began to yield results as he painstakingly reconstructed deleted emails and recovered encrypted communications that painted a horrifying picture of the conspiracy's leadership. The digital trail led directly to Patrick, Infranet's charismatic CEO, and included board members Raphael and Griffin, as well as several high-ranking executives who had been complicit in the scheme. The evidence revealed that the conspiracy had been operating for over 3 years, systematically targeting individuals who posed financial or political threats to the conspirators' interests. Whistleblowers had been silenced through accidental autonomous vehicle crashes. Competing executives had died from random medical device failures. Investigative journalists had suffered unfortunate incidents with their smart home security systems. Each death appeared isolated and tragic, but together they formed a pattern of technological assassination that had eliminated dozens of people, while generating hundreds of millions in illegal profits. The breakthrough that finally brought down the conspiracy came when Abel discovered a backup server that had been overlooked during the evidence destruction. Hidden in the basement of an Infranet facility in San Jose, the server contained complete records of Project Umbra, including detailed plans for future assassinations and financial records showing how the profits were distributed among the conspirators. Armed with overwhelming evidence, Joel coordinated with the FBI to execute simultaneous raids on Infranet facilities across the country. The arrests were broadcast live on national television as federal agents led Patrick and his accomplices away in handcuffs, their corporate empire crumbling around them as stock prices plummeted and investigations spread to other tech companies. The trial that followed captivated the nation and sparked a global conversation about the dangers of unchecked technological power. Prosecutors presented evidence showing that the conspirators had caused over 200 deaths, while generating more than $500 million in illegal profits. Patrick was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while his accomplices Raphael and Griffin received sentences of 40 and 35 years respectively. Infranet was fined $2 billion and forced to implement comprehensive oversight measures to prevent future abuses. The case led to sweeping reforms in artificial intelligence regulation, cybersecurity oversight, and corporate governance. New federal agencies were created to monitor AI development, and tech companies were required to submit their algorithms for independent review before deployment. The Infranet case became a watershed moment that demonstrated that even the most powerful corporations could be held accountable for their crimes. Today, Paisley and Alice run CyberGuard, a nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting consumers from technological abuse and advocating for ethical AI development. Ruby won the Pulitzer Prize for her reporting on the case, and now leads a media watchdog organization that monitors corporate crime. Joel was promoted to lead the Justice Department's new cybercrime division, where he continues to prosecute cases involving the abuse of technology. Abel became a sought-after consultant on digital forensics and AI ethics, helping law enforcement agencies around the world investigate similar crimes. Their story stands as a powerful reminder that in an age where technology touches every aspect of our lives, the guardians of that technology hold unprecedented power over life and death. The Infranet conspiracy showed how easily that power can be abused when driven by greed and unchecked by oversight. But it also demonstrated that courage, persistence, and collaboration can expose even the most sophisticated crimes and bring justice to those who believe themselves untouchable. The digital age has brought humanity unprecedented benefits, but it has also created new opportunities for those who would exploit technology for evil purposes. As our lives become increasingly dependent on artificial intelligence and automated systems, the need for vigilance, transparency, and accountability becomes ever more critical. The heroes who exposed the infranet conspiracy risked everything to protect us from unseen digital predators, and their example reminds us that the price of technological progress must never be paid with innocent lives. Let's move to our sixth story. And this one reveals how the dust from a 1950s textile mill carried more than cotton. It carried death. The air in Lawrence, Massachusetts, tasted different in 1953. Thick with cotton dust, yes, but also with something else. Progress. The textile mills that lined the Merrimack River were the beating heart of American industry. Their red brick facades promising prosperity to anyone willing to work hard enough to claim it. But beneath the rhythmic thudding of looms and the whistle of shift changes, something darker was brewing. A conspiracy of silence that would span generations and cost hundreds of lives. Cora was 24 when she first walked through the gates of Pemberton Mill, her lunch pail clutched tight and her dreams even tighter. A single mother trying to support her young daughter Ariana after her husband died in Korea. She took the job in the weaving room, despite warnings from neighbors about the mill sickness that seemed to follow workers home. The pay was good, better than anything else available to a woman in 1953 Lawrence. And Cora needed every penny. What she found inside those brick walls was a world unto itself. Hundreds of workers, mostly women, bent over massive looms in air so thick with cotton fibers you could barely see across the floor. The dust settled on everything: hair, clothes, skin, until workers looked like ghosts moving through a white fog. The company provided thin cloth masks, but they clogged within hours and made breathing even harder in the stifling heat. Cora noticed the coughing first. It started as a dry tickle in her throat after her third week, but soon developed into violent spasms that left her gasping for air. When she mentioned it to her supervisor, a company man named Parker, who had worked his way up from the floor, he just shrugged and handed her a throat lozenge. "Part of the job, sweetheart. You'll get used to it." But Cora never got used to it. None of the workers did. She watched as colleagues, women she'd grown to know and love, began calling in sick more frequently. Some developed a persistent wheeze that followed them home. Others complained of chest pains so severe they could barely climb the stairs to their tenement apartments. The company doctor, Louis, who visited the mill monthly, dismissed their concerns as female hysteria or weakness of constitution, and prescribed rest and fresh air that was impossible to get while working 12-hour shifts. The first death came in the winter of 1954. Cora's friend Margaret collapsed at her loom during the morning shift, blood frothing from her mouth as she struggled to breathe. The company blamed a weak heart, but Margaret had been healthy and strong when she started at the mill 18 months earlier. Her death was ruled natural causes, and work resumed the next day as if nothing had happened. That's when Cora began keeping notes. In a small composition book she hid beneath her mattress, she recorded the names of workers who fell ill, the symptoms they described, and the dates they stopped coming to work. The pattern that emerged was terrifying. Nearly every worker who spent more than a year in the mill developed severe respiratory problems. Many died within 5 years of starting their employment. When Cora tried to bring her concerns to Parker, he became hostile and threatening. "You've got a good job here," he warned, his face inches from hers. "Don't ruin it with troublemaking. There are plenty of girls who'd take your place." The message was clear. Speak up and you're out. For a single mother in 1950s Massachusetts, unemployment meant destitution. But Cora couldn't stay silent while her friends and colleagues were dying. She reached out to Natalia, a young reporter at the Lawrence Tribune who had been covering labor issues in the mills. Natalia was immediately interested in Cora's story, especially when she presented the notebook, documenting dozens of suspicious illnesses and deaths. Together, they began investigating the mill's practices more deeply. What they discovered was shocking. Pemberton Mill was using a new chemical treatment on cotton fibers to make them easier to process. But the treatment created toxic dust that, when inhaled, caused severe lung scarring and eventually death. The company knew about the dangers. Internal memos Natalia uncovered through a sympathetic clerk showed executives discussing the acceptable casualty rate and calculating whether it was cheaper to pay death benefits or install proper ventilation systems. The story Natalia published in 1955 sent shockwaves through Lawrence. Death in the Mills: How Pemberton Sacrificed Workers for Profit detailed the cover-up and named names. The response was swift and brutal. Natalia was fired from the Tribune after pressure from advertisers. Cora was blacklisted from every mill in the city, and several witnesses who had spoken to Natalia found themselves unemployed. Cora and Ariana were forced to leave Lawrence, moving to Boston, where Cora found work as a seamstress. The story faded from public memory, and Pemberton Mill continued operating with minimal changes to its practices. The company paid small settlements to some families, but admitted no wrongdoing, and the chemical treatments continued. For nearly 70 years, the truth lay buried in yellowed newspaper clippings and Cora's hidden notebook, which Ariana discovered after her mother's death in 1998. Ariana had always wondered why her mother developed such severe breathing problems in her later years, and reading the notebook finally provided answers that had eluded doctors for decades. In 2022, Ariana's granddaughter Kyrie was working as an environmental lawyer in Boston when she came across the notebook while helping her grandmother clean out Cora's effects. Kyrie had specialized in cases involving historical environmental contamination, and she immediately recognized the legal implications of what her great-grandmother had documented. Working with Elian, a forensic accountant who specialized in corporate cover-ups, and Cairo, an investigative journalist from the Boston Globe, Kyrie began building a case against Pemberton Mill's corporate successors. Modern technology allowed them to uncover documents that had been hidden for decades. Emails, internal reports, and executive communications that showed the company had known about the deadly effects of their chemical treatments, but had chosen profits over human life. The breakthrough came when Elian discovered that Pemberton Mill had been sold several times over the decades. But the parent company had maintained detailed records of all their operations, including the Lawrence facility. Hidden in a warehouse in North Carolina, boxes of documents revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. Company executives had not only known about the deaths, but had actively worked to suppress information and intimidate witnesses. Most damning of all was a 1954 memo from the company's chief executive to Parker, ordering him to manage the worker situation with minimal publicity, and authorizing payments to local officials to ensure that deaths were not investigated too closely. The memo was signed and dated, providing incontrovertible proof of the conspiracy. The lawsuit Kyrie filed in 2023 became a landmark case in environmental and occupational justice, representing over 300 families of mill workers who had died from lung diseases. She argued that the company had knowingly poisoned its workforce and then covered up the evidence for decades. The trial was covered extensively by national media, bringing attention to the broader issue of corporate accountability for historical crimes. The evidence was overwhelming. Cora's notebook, Natalia's articles, and the company documents painted a picture of systematic murder dressed up as industrial progress. Expert witnesses testified about the toxic effects of the chemical treatments, and survivors of the mill told heartbreaking stories of watching their mothers, sisters, and friends waste away from preventable diseases. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before finding the company guilty on all counts. The settlement of $2.3 billion was one of the largest in Massachusetts history, with money going to victim families, environmental cleanup, and the establishment of a workers' safety foundation in Cora's name. But perhaps more importantly, the case led to sweeping changes in how corporations are held accountable for historical crimes. New laws require companies to preserve records of workplace safety issues and give whistleblowers stronger protections. The CORA Act, passed by Congress in 2024, makes it a federal crime for companies to knowingly expose workers to toxic substances and then cover up the evidence. Today, where Pemberton Mill once stood, there is a memorial park dedicated to the workers who died from preventable diseases. At its center is a statue of Cora, notebook in hand, with an inscription that reads, "She kept the records when no one else would. She spoke the truth when silence was safer. She fought for justice when justice seemed impossible." Kyrie, Elian, and Cairo continue their work exposing corporate crimes, using Cora's story as inspiration for other families seeking justice for historical wrongs. The notebook that Cora hid under her mattress now sits in the Smithsonian, a testament to the power of ordinary people to document extraordinary crimes. The mills are silent now, but their legacy lives on, not in the profits they generated or the progress they represented, but in the courage of one woman who refused to let her friends die in vain. Cora's dust has finally settled, but the truth she preserved continues to echo through courtrooms and corporate boardrooms across America, reminding us that justice may be delayed, but it is never truly buried. Let's move to our 7th story. And this reveals how academic freedom at an elite university came with a deadly price. In the crisp autumn of 2023, Hawthorne University stood as a monument to American intellectual achievement, its Gothic towers rising above the Connecticut landscape like guardians of knowledge itself. Founded in 1847, the university had weathered civil wars, world wars, and cultural revolutions. But nothing had prepared it for the battle that would unfold within its ivy-covered walls. A war between truth and power that would echo through the halls of academia for generations to come. Professor Guyana was 42 years old, and at the peak of her career when she first noticed something was wrong. A renowned environmental scientist whose research on climate change had influenced policy at the highest levels of government. She had dedicated her life to the pursuit of truth through rigorous scientific inquiry. Her laboratory on the 3rd floor of the Environmental Sciences Building was a sanctuary of hypothesis and discovery, where graduate students worked late into the night, analyzing ice core samples and atmospheric data. But in September 2023, Gianna began noticing disturbing patterns in the university's research funding. Grants that had been approved for climate research were mysteriously delayed or redirected. Peer-reviewed papers that challenged certain industrial practices were being rejected by journals that had previously welcomed her work. Most troubling of all, several of her graduate students reported that their research proposals were being blocked by administrative red tape that seemed designed to prevent rather than facilitate scientific investigation. The first concrete evidence came from Lily, a brilliant doctoral student whose dissertation research had uncovered alarming connections between industrial emissions and respiratory diseases in nearby communities. Lily's work was meticulous, her data compelling. But when she tried to present her findings at a regional conference, she was informed that the university would not provide funding for her presentation. The official reason given was budgetary constraints. But Lily noticed that other, less controversial research projects continued to receive generous support. Determined to understand what was happening, Gianna reached out to Henry, an investigative journalist from the Hartford Courant, who had built a reputation for exposing corporate influence in higher education. Henry was immediately intrigued by Gianna's concerns, especially when she showed him internal university memos that seemed to prioritize donor relations over academic integrity. Their investigation began in earnest when Emily, a computer science professor with expertise in digital forensics, joined their informal alliance. Emily had her own concerns about the university's recent policy changes regarding data storage and research transparency. Using her technical skills, she began analyzing the university's digital records and discovered a pattern of systematic deletion of research files, particularly those related to environmental and public health studies. What they uncovered was a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of university administration. Hawthorne University, facing budget pressures and declining state funding, had entered into financial arrangements with several major corporations that gave those companies unprecedented influence over academic research. The Petros Institute, a think tank funded by oil and gas companies, had contributed over $50 million to the university over the past 5 years. With the understanding that research unfavorable to fossil fuel interests would be discouraged or suppressed. The smoking gun came in the form of encrypted emails recovered by Emily from a supposedly secure server. The messages, exchanged between university administrators and corporate representatives, detailed a systematic campaign to silence academic research that posed threats to specific industries. Professors whose work challenged corporate interests were subjected to increased scrutiny, funding cuts, and in some cases, harassment designed to drive them from the university. The conspiracy was overseen by Matteo, the university's vice president for development, who had cultivated relationships with corporate donors by promising them influence over academic research. Working with William, the dean of the College of Natural Sciences, Matteo had created an informal network of administrators who ensured that controversial research was either suppressed or redirected toward more industry-friendly topics. As word of their investigation began to spread, Gianna, Henry, and Emily found themselves under increasing pressure. Gianna's research funding was suddenly subjected to routine review that stretched on for months. Henry received legal threats from university attorneys warning him about publishing unsubstantiated allegations. Most disturbingly, Lily reported that her apartment had been broken into, though nothing appeared to have been stolen, except for backup drives containing her research data. The situation escalated when students, inspired by Gianna's courage and Lily's activism, began organizing protests on campus. Taking inspiration from historical acts of academic resistance, they held silent vigils on the university quad, each student holding a blank sheet of paper to symbolize the research and knowledge that was being suppressed. The administration's response was swift and harsh. Protest organizers were suspended, campus security was increased, and surveillance cameras were installed in previously public spaces. The breakthrough came when Elijah, a graduate student in the journalism school, managed to record a secret meeting between university administrators and corporate representatives. The recording, made using equipment hidden in a backpack, captured Matteo and William discussing specific research projects that needed to be managed and professors who were becoming problems that required solutions. Armed with this evidence, Gianna and her allies reached out to Lucas, a federal prosecutor who specialized in cases involving corruption in educational institutions. Lucas was initially skeptical, but the wealth of evidence, emails, financial records, recorded conversations, and testimony from affected faculty and students convinced him that federal intervention was necessary. The case that Lucas brought before a federal grand jury in early 2024 was unlike any in the history of American higher education. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of federal research integrity guidelines, and racketeering under the RICO Act. The defendants included not only university administrators, but also corporate executives who had participated in the scheme to influence academic research. The trial, which began in June 2024, captivated national attention and sparked a broader conversation about the role of corporate money in higher education. Gianna testified about the systematic suppression of her research, while Lily described the personal cost of challenging the university's corruption. Henry's investigative reporting provided crucial context, and Emily's digital forensics evidence formed the backbone of the prosecution's case. The defense argued that the relationships between the university and its corporate donors were legitimate partnerships designed to advance scientific knowledge, while ensuring that research had practical applications. They portrayed the defendants as visionary administrators who were trying to balance academic freedom with financial sustainability in an era of declining public funding for higher education. But the evidence was overwhelming. Internal documents showed that research projects were routinely altered or abandoned based on corporate input rather than scientific merit. Faculty members testified about pressure to change their research findings, and students described an atmosphere of fear that stifled intellectual inquiry. Most damaging of all was the recorded conversation in which Matteo explicitly discussed the need to neutralize professors whose research threatened corporate interests. The jury deliberated for 8 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all major charges. Matteo and William were each sentenced to 7 years in federal prison, while several corporate executives received sentences ranging from 3 to 5 years. The university was fined $75 million and placed under federal oversight to ensure compliance with research integrity standards. More importantly, the case led to sweeping changes in how universities handle corporate partnerships. The Hawthorne Act, passed by Congress in late 2024, requires universities to publicly disclose all corporate funding arrangements and prohibits donors from influencing research outcomes. The legislation also provides stronger protections for faculty and students who report research integrity violations. Today, Gianna continues her climate research at Hawthorne, now free from corporate interference and supported by a new generation of administrators committed to academic freedom. Her laboratory has become a symbol of resistance to corporate influence in higher education, and her work on climate change continues to inform policy at the national level. Lily completed her dissertation and now works for the Environmental Protection Agency, where she uses her research to develop regulations protecting public health. Henry won a Pulitzer Prize for his investigative reporting on the Hawthorne case and continues to expose corruption in educational institutions across the country. Emily has established a nonprofit organization that provides digital forensic services to faculty and students, fighting institutional corruption, while Lucas has been promoted to head the Justice Department's New Education Integrity Division, which investigates fraud in higher education. The memorial to academic freedom that stands in the center of Hawthorne's quad serves as a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge requires constant vigilance against those who would corrupt it for personal gain. Engraved on the memorial are the words that Gianna spoke during her testimony. Truth is not a commodity to be bought and sold. It is a sacred trust that we hold for future generations. Each year on the anniversary of the verdict, students gather at the memorial holding blank sheets of paper, just as their predecessors did during the darkest days of the conspiracy. The silence speaks louder than any speech, reminding all who pass that academic freedom, once lost, may never be recovered. Thank you for diving into the depths of crime and justice with Crime Cipher. If you found this story gripping, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell icon so you never miss the next unveiling of hidden truths. Your curiosity is our power. Stay vigilant, stay engaged, and keep decoding the darkest corners of truth with us.